and welcome to another fabulous episode of Thyroid Refresh TV, a podcast dedicated to helping you live a thyroid healthy lifestyle. We're so glad to be back with you again. I'm Danna Bowman.
And I'm Ginny Maher, and we are the dynamic duo behind Thyroid Refresh and Thyroid 30. And we're so thrilled to be here today with Kerry Jeffery to talk about the emotional challenges of living with chronic illness. Welcome, Carrie. Thanks so much for joining us all the way from Melbourne, Australia.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, guys. I'm really excited to be here.
Great. Before we jump in, let's hear a little bit about your bio so everybody can know what we're jumping into today. Kerry Jeffery is a clinical hypnotherapist, counselor, and life coach, working exclusively online with clients all over the world to help them overcome the complex emotional issues of living with chronic illness using her unique therapy programs. She's also the face behind the Emotional Autoimmunity podcast, website, and social media accounts. Kerry's Emotional Autoimmunity podcast speaks to the key emotional challenges that we face living with chronic illness, including guilt, trauma, how to speak with others about your chronic illness, and her own experiences. So thanks so much for joining us, Carrie.
Oh, you're so welcome. I can't wait to get started.
Well, I know we've been really looking forward to this episode. We first came across you on Instagram because we so love your content, which takes that approach of really addressing the emotional aspect of this journey. As we all know, this isn't just a physical illness. The journey goes way beyond that, spiritual, emotional. This is a test of character, of strength. It can be challenging. It can be defeating. It can be life-altering in positive and negative ways. And we're so thrilled to come across someone like you who's really speaking to that part of the journey. And I want to let the listeners know before we dive in that, Carrie, you live with 4 autoimmune diseases. I think that's important for people to know before we dive in. So you have Hashimoto's, celiac, antiphospholipid syndrome, and most recently you were diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And at the point when you developed Hashimoto's over 6 years ago, you were physically and cognitively disabled with no idea of whether or not you would live or be able to work and support yourself and your family again. So I would love it if you could tell us a little bit about your journey and how it led you here.
Sure. And the antiphospholipid syndrome was the first thing that I was diagnosed with. And that was when I was trying to conceive my second child. And I was over the age of 40 and I'd had multiple miscarriages. And it just so happened that there was a professor of, I can't think of the correct term, but studies of the blood, it'll probably come to me later, who was doing a study on this then very, very controversial potential new disease. And so they tested my blood, said I had the antibodies for it, and I got put into his program. So what antiphospholipid syndrome is, it's a tendency of the blood to be thicker and to clot more than normal people. So in my case, it did only affect me in pregnancy. And what was happening was that it was forming blood clots in the placenta. So that was choking off any nutrition that was going to the developing embryo, and then it would die, and then I would experience miscarriage. So it was a very high risk pregnancy when I did become pregnant, and I had to inject myself with blood thinners every day, twice a day, which was quite painful. And I was under the care of a professor of obstetrics and the professor that was dealing with the antiphospholipid syndrome. But after that, it didn't really impact my life. Like, I've never had any blood clots or deep vein thrombosis or anything like that. So I've been very lucky. So touching wood, I've never had to actually go on and do anything about that. And then 6 years ago, I got what I thought was a really, really bad flu. And I was one of those people who had never got sick, which, hello, should have been a sign, right? Really, really active autoimmune system. I rarely got colds. I was rarely at the doctor's, only been in hospital twice for childbirth. So I thought, I've got this really bad flu, and I was getting really weak and I was in a lot of pain and my head hurt and I just felt terrible. My vision was affected. I started gaining a whole lot of weight, but it wasn't like normal weight. It was like fluidy weight all around my middle. My face changed to the point I didn't recognize myself. My hair was falling out. And I remember sitting on the couch one day and I just fell over to the side because I couldn't keep myself upright.
Wow.
And I thought, God, I've got to do something. So I went to the doctor and he sent me for blood tests, and he rang me the next day and he said, I know what it is. It's very treatable. Come in and see me. So I went in and saw him. And at that stage, I could barely walk. I could barely think. I was having trouble breathing. I was having chest pain. I couldn't speak. I could barely make it for the drive. I was sitting in the waiting room sort of just trying to focus on breathing because I had air hunger. And I don't know if any of you girls have had that, but it's this horrible feeling that no matter how much breath you take, you're just not getting enough oxygen into your system. So it creates a lot of anxiety. And he said, your thyroid's dead. We don't know why. You just take your little pill and get used to your new normal. And I was like, what? Like, how does a part of your body just die? And he said, oh, it's past its shelf life. You know, it just happens. We don't know why. And then he told me,
My goodness, holy cow.
Then he told me that I had hypothyroidism. And I'm like, no, if my thyroid's dead, doesn't that mean I've got Hashimoto's, or, you know, I'm hypothyroid? And we had an argument about that. And I said, isn't there anything that can be done? No, not that I know of. Isn't there any other treatment? Not that I know of. And I just thought, this is unacceptable. Like, you're basically telling me I am disabled and this is my new normal. Just accept that. And I walked out of that office and I knew that if I was going to do anything, it was up to me. Like, if I was going to make it through this, I was the only person that was going to help me. And so through all the brain fog and all of this stuff, I just started researching. And I don't know if you've had this experience. I think it's pretty common. When you go looking on the internet about your condition and about the disease, it's terrifying. Like, you come across groups of people online that are desperate and depressed and suffering. And, you know, there was even some people talking about taking their own lives, and it was just horrendous. And I thought, oh my God, this is terrifying. I'm already scared. So I started very carefully researching more positive, like, so overcoming Hashimoto's or living well with Hashimoto's. And then I stumbled across Dr. Terry Walls and watched her video on minding your mitochondria. And that was what I needed. I just needed someone to tell me there was something that I could do to help myself. And that was the start of that process. So I interviewed some doctors. I found my wonderful general practitioner that I've got now and just said, look, I'm looking for someone who's willing to partner with me. I know what I want to do. I want that support. I want you to help me with testing. And she said, I have no issues with that. And she's been fantastic, because that's what we all need, right? Someone that will believe us and support us. And what she actually said was so incredibly validating the first time I saw her, because she said, Kerry, you are seriously ill. You are the worst Hashimoto's patient I have ever seen. You know, you must not stress yourself. Like, if you walk slowly, don't run, you know, don't exert yourself. Your thyroid levels are so low, you could actually go into heart failure. So that was just that validation that, oh my God, yeah, I'm not making this up. There is something seriously wrong with me. And it gave me so much awe of my body, because I thought, wow, body, if you can do this, you know, when I have barely looked after you in 50 something years, like, what could you do if I really looked after you? And from there was the diagnosis about 6 months later of a celiac disease. And as I said recently, with a with the type 1 diabetes, which was very unexpected. So the biggest thing that hit me as a therapist was that I'm always looking for how I can learn from this. Like, what are the tools that I need? How can I help myself? Because mindset is everything, especially when it comes to living with chronic illness. And there was nothing out there. Like, there was nobody talking about how do you learn to emotionally accept it, because it is the loss of yourself. Like, the old Carrie was gone. Like, and it's the loss of your future. Like, it was all the things that I thought I was going to do. I had my career mapped out. I was just starting to become quite well known as a therapist. Then I was focusing on helping the adult children of toxic parents. I was writing a book. I was getting interviewed. And then boom, it's suddenly, well, here you are. You can't work. You don't know if you're going to live. You don't know if you'll ever be able to support yourself again. And there was no acknowledgement of that at all. And so I started talking to people about it. And that was when I realized there's a real need for this, because people need to know that it's not in their head. They're not crazy. They're not making it up. They're not exaggerating. This is a real loss of the self.
Well, and you were going through this whole harrowing, years long journey of so many very serious health issues as a therapist. I wondered about that. It wasn't, this path didn't so much lead you to that. You already had that lens, and it must have been really interesting, I would think, as a therapist, to go through that journey and to really see, to experience being dismissed by your doctor, to experience all the fear and doubt and emotions that come up when we get a diagnosis like this, when we go through the physical experience of it, and have those moments where we wonder, am I going to make it? Am I going to be able to live my life? What was that like for you?
Oh, it was devastating. It was life-changing, and it was incredibly traumatic, especially my first experience, to be so dismissed, because that first doctor really trivialized it and like, take your little pill and get used to your new normal. And those words were branded into my brain. And it's just so wrong. And then I heard, when I started talking to people about their experiences, I heard the same thing over and over again, how people are dismissed, how people are condescended to, how they're told that it's all in their head, how they're, told they should go on antidepressants or go and see a therapist, and it's not that bad, and it's because you're a mother, that's why you're tired, you've got young children, or, it's a normal part of aging. And it's all so ridiculous. And that was shocking to me, because I'd never really had any experience of illness before. And, I generally went as a mother, and it was, the kids had simple things like tonsil infection or, a virus or something like that. And it was, you went to the doctor told you what was wrong. They gave you your antibiotics or whatever it was, and you got better. And I think the biggest issue is that we don't fit into the normal model of illness, because the model of illness is either you get sick and you get better, or you get sick and you die. And people can't understand that whole concept of chronic illness. And that was what it was like for me, realizing that I'm trying to articulate my experience to a world that does not understand and can't relate to it. You just get blank looks, and you get that constant, aren't you feeling better yet? Like, oh, but you look so well. Why do you mean you've got to cancel again? All of that stuff. They can't wrap their mind around the fact that chronic means ongoing, that autoimmune diseases at the moment are incurable, and that they're often progressive. And it depends on the particular disease you've got. Like, I found more people have an understanding of things like multiple sclerosis, because they see somebody going from healthy to increasingly disabled. So they've got some concept of that. But things like Hashimoto's are just trivialized, right? Because you get comments, as I did, like somebody said to me, oh, my grandmother has that. She just takes a pill and she's still playing golf once a week. And you think, well, then what's wrong with me? Because I'm absolutely disabled.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't work and I can barely think and I'm in pain and I can't stand up because of the pain in my body. So there's such dismissal and lack of understanding, and there's no support from the doctors, because even when you do get a diagnosis and you think, hallelujah, finally, here's a label, we can do something about it, you soon find out that in the majority of cases, there is very little that the medical community can do for you. And again, you're kind of on your own. And it's so isolating, and it's such a huge weight to carry, because when you have chronic illness, it feels like everything is on you. You've got to be your own researcher. You've got to be your own nutritionist. You've got to be your own doctor. You've got to be your own cheer squad, all of those things. And that can be completely exhausting at a time in your life where you're already so depleted that it's a struggle to get out of bed.
Mm-hmm. And that's such a good point, because, Jenny and I often say when we have people on the shows, you have to be your own advocate. But with that, it's such a heavy thing. With that comes all of, like you said, you have to be your own researcher. You have to be your own cheerleader. You have to be, with saying that, it sounds a little simple. You need to self-advocate. But realizing what comes with that, it's a huge thing. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that people realize, even when they go, okay, I'll be a self-advocate. I'll self-advocate for myself. Going through it.
It's easier said than done.
Thank you. Yes. It's way easier said than done.
The other great point you make is that this is different for everyone. Whereas there are plenty of people out there who do just take their pill and go on with their lives, and it's not really much of an issue at all for them. There is a significant percentage of us, and we're starting to be more researched and medically acknowledged, but there's a significant percentage of us who are seriously affected and debilitated by something, as seemingly simple as Hashimoto's hypothyroidism. I remember back when we first launched Thyroid Refresh, we did a survey of thyroid patients and we asked what was their biggest challenge. And we got like 1,700 responses. I mean, we had a really good response. And I'll never forget, the number one answer by a long shot was that people felt too sick and tired to even do anything about it. That's a lot of people who are just stuck, and they're being told by their doctors at the same time, it's all in your head. Anything, you feeling this way is unrelated, or like you said, let's talk about antidepressants. You just need to eat less, exercise more. Our friends and loved ones, they try to understand, but it's hard. It's just one of those things. You can't really understand it until you've lived it. I wondered, Carrie, we all know how emotionally and spiritually tiring this journey can be, right? But seeing, that many people say that they felt that stuck really broke our hearts. And it also highlighted for us how many people feel powerless. So I wondered if you could talk to those people who feel so disempowered and so hopeless. What would your message to them be?
To not give up and to accept the reality that it actually is up to you. And the most important thing that you can do in the face of medical gaslighting, and any form of gaslighting is an attempt to get you to not believe your version of reality, right? To undermine or belittle and tell you that you're wrong, how you feel is wrong, or you must be mistaken, or it's all in your head, when it's your lived experience. When it comes to talking to doctors and trying to get them on board to support you, the biggest issue we face is usually, as you said, Jenny, you go and you're so overwhelmed, you're emotional because you're scared, like you're terrified, you know something's wrong, you desperately want somebody to help you, you're feeling awful. You've got no energy. Your brain is not functioning properly. So by the time you get to the doctor, you're just wanting someone to say, yes, I will help you. I will believe you. And the minute you start talking about anything emotional, you can almost see the switch go off through their eyes, through their head, like, okay, psychosomatic, refer to a therapist. Because unfortunately, most general practitioners are allowed to diagnose mental illness, right? Within 5 seconds, 5 minutes, without any psychological training whatsoever. And when you don't get that support or you don't get that belief, you tend to burst into tears, and then they just go hysterical and they stop taking you seriously. And then next time you go to the doctor, it's even harder for you to be calm and rational. So what you really need to do is believe yourself. When it comes to any sort of influence or persuasion or getting someone to work with you, the first person you've got to convince is you. Because when you believe there is something really wrong with me, then when the doctor says, look, it's probably just because you're tired or you've got young children, then you can look them in the eye and say, doctor, I know myself. There is something seriously wrong. This is not normal for me, and I really need your help and support to help me get to the bottom of this. Is this something we can do?
That's really powerful, because we tell people, again, on the show, because we're trying to help and we have lots of great tools and things. But I remember on several shows we've mentioned that when your doctor won't run a full thyroid panel, that we have been, referred this method. We call it the Mary Showman kind of method of, okay, if you won't do that, then if you'll just write that down on a piece of paper that you won't run the full, and sign it, and then I'll sign it, make a copy, you keep it in my folder, and I'll take one home, right? Because this gets the doctors to respond, right? So we give this kind of information, we give these kind of tools or whatever, but you almost don't really look at that aspect of first believe yourself, because how hard is that to just do that, right? To say, could you please write that down? I mean, it's easy for us to, easier said than done. As Jenny said earlier, it's easy to say, look, this is something that, and it's been helpful and it's been proven and doctors respond to it. But until you believe in yourself and you believe and have that conviction, look, something's wrong, and that you feel like you can stand up to someone who isn't maybe believing you, right? That seems like that should be the most important first step before you do that,
Yeah. And most people are terrified of confrontation. So there you are, sick, anxious, can't think properly, and you're going to say to a doctor, oh, just write that on a piece of paper that you're refusing to do the test. Like, there's no way most people can do that. So you've really got to have that confidence going in. And the other little mind shift that you can use is that for centuries, doctors have been seen almost as godlike, authoritative figures. You don't argue with the doctor. What the doctor says is correct because they know and you don't. So there's been this real power inequality that, you are the patient, they are the doctor, they know. If you switch that and you understand medicine is a business, right? People go into the helping profession out of a genuine need to help. But doctors are still, at the end of the day, running a business with families and things to support, right? They are there to make money. And hospitals are a business. The medical industry is an industry. They are service providers. That is what they are. So you need to choose your doctor in the same way you are going to choose a good mechanic, because we all know finding a good mechanic is like gold. Right? A great doctor is a gift. Don't tolerate treatment that is dismissive or arrogant, or, somebody is not going to believe you. But you have much more chance if you go in and go, right, I'm interviewing them, right? They are a service provider. I'm not going to be arrogant. I'm not going to be aggressive. I am going to be open and I am going to be assertive. And I know there is something wrong with me, and that is what I'm going to convey. And you also do not talk about emotional issues. Don't talk about anxious. Don't talk about depressed, because the minute you do that, they tag you as referral to a counselor or antidepressants. You talk about the physical symptoms. So you go in with your list of 3 to 5 of your key symptoms. This is what I'm experiencing. So I've got pain in these areas of my body. My energy levels are extremely low. I am struggling to get through the day. I have blurry vision, or be very explicit, stick to the physical symptoms. And that makes it easier because they stay engaged. But the minute you say, I can't sleep because I'm awake all night and I'm worrying because I don't feel well, boom, antidepressants, go and see a psychologist.
That's a great practical tip. And I've heard other experts, highlight this issue that a doctor really shouldn't be able to prescribe you an antidepressant after talking to you about not feeling like yourself for 30 seconds. And I've had that experience, and I know a lot of our listeners have. Yeah.
Yep.
But what a great practical tip to just not to ignore those those symptoms, but to be organized, write those symptoms down, track those symptoms, a health log, a health journal. Maybe it's a note on your smartphone that you just add to. I mean, something to help you really lock in and identify what are my main symptoms, so that when you go to your doctor's appointment, you're speaking their language and you can help them help you. Because they did get into this to help people. But yeah, I think you highlight another really important issue. It's that imbalance of power. And I always say, you know what? I may not be a doctor, but I am an expert on how I feel. And for me, it was 4 years of going in and saying, I just don't feel like myself. I'm tired all day, every day. I feel flat. I feel like my spark is going out. I'm gaining weight, even though I'm on a calorie restricted diet, and it was just the same thing everybody hears. Just take your pill. That's unrelated. You're just tired because you're a mom. It's so frustratingly relatable. But these are very serious issues. When I finally asked for the test for Hashimoto's, I didn't even know I had Hashimoto's for 4 years because, maybe this is the same in Australia, but here in the US, most of us aren't tested for Hashimoto's because it doesn't change the doctor's treatment protocol. They don't see or value educating patients about the fact that they even have an autoimmune condition. And I'll never forget going in for my blood work that day to the lab in the same hospital where my doctor's office was, and looking at this collection of nature photos on the wall. And they were just pretty. At the end of the collection was a note from the photographer. It said, I have a chronic autoimmune condition and it has severely affected my life. I'm in bed most of the time, but on the days when I do feel, I can't hold a normal job or live a normal life, but on the days when I do feel well enough to get out of bed, this is what I like to do, is take nature photos. And the autoimmune disease I have is Hashimoto's. It's not always as simple as just take your pill. And it would be really wonderful, if more medical service providers could appreciate that patient end of the experience. But I'm wondering too about, you work with clients one-on-one, right? And anybody who's listening can connect with Carrie and work with her, in a coaching or therapeutic sort of arrangement. In Australia, she's able to do that worldwide. We talked about before the show, but I'm curious, what, Carrie, is the biggest or maybe most common emotional roadblock you see in your clients that sort of gets in, where people are sort of getting in their own way of taking these empowering steps on their healing journey?
It's such a great question. I would say above the board, guilt. Guilt is the biggest issue that I see people with. They feel guilty because they feel like they're letting everybody down.
Oh.
They feel guilty if they're a parent because they feel like their children are suffering because they can't do the activities, go to the school, be there. They feel like they're damaging them emotionally because they won't, you know, that's all they're going to do is remember mum being sick. They're going to be their memory of that. They feel like they're letting their partners down because they might have to give up full-time work or not, you know, move to part-time work. They feel guilty because I know particularly in America with your health system there, people can go into millions of dollars of debt. They feel guilty about that. They feel guilty they're letting their friends down because they're always cancelling, and they end up feeling like a burden. And when you feel like a burden, it's basically like you end up in this position where you feel like you want to give everybody an out of the relationship, or you expect that they're just going to get sick of you. And unfortunately, that does happen. I've spoken to countless clients whose family don't understand, and some even who have family who also have chronic illness and find them to be the most judgmental and the harshest ones to deal with. And the other thing about chronic illness as well is that if there's been any issues in your relationship, when you get chronic illness, it highlights all of those cracks that are there. And so things that you're able to deal with or put to the side or make up for when you were well, suddenly you don't have the energy to do that anymore. And lots of relationships get into trouble because of that. So guilt is the biggest one, and feeling like a burden is what most people say. And they feel very depressed, very overwhelmed. They feel useless. They feel hopeless. They can't see any value in themselves, because most of us take our self-esteem from what we can achieve, what we do, being productive. And when you feel that you can't be productive anymore, you don't feel like you've have any value left. And the other biggest issue on the heels of that is denial. And that's like, I can't accept this disease. I don't want to deal with my grief, because if I really turn and face my grief, I feel like I will be so overwhelmed, it will bring me to my knees and I will never get up again. So they just push and push and push and push.
You know, when you first said guilt, I was like, wow, I'm surprised. And then as you sort of elaborated on that, it was like, oh, wow, I just feel that.
I didn't associate it with guilt before, right?
Right? Just deep in my belly, like, oh, yeah. Yeah. So how do we get past that to a place of more self-acceptance?
You've got to accept the fact, and if this is the hardest thing, is the first thing you've got to do is deal with your grief. That is the thing getting in the way, right? Because what we want intrinsically in our hearts, we want our old selves back, right? We want to be that person we were before the sickness. We want to be able to do those things we could do, because there's so many people, that loss of identity goes into every area of their life. Like they might have been part of sports groups, maybe cyclists. Well, they can't do that anymore. So that whole group and that enjoyment is gone. They can't even go to church anymore. They're not well enough. So they're denied that comfort of the community. They can't do that. They could have lost a career that they've been training for years and really enjoyed. So they've given up that. So they feel like they've got nothing left. So that grief, like facing that, is the biggest part of the process to accept that disease. And a lot of the reasons that people don't want to accept it is that they confuse acceptance with giving up. And so they say things like, this isn't going to be part of my life. I'm not going to allow Hashimoto's to be my label. You know, it's not going to dominate me. It's not who I am. But it is a reality, and you have to integrate it into your daily life, which means it just becomes part of who you are, that it is a fact. And if you can see it as a factual thing, it makes it so much easier to deal with. You've got to find a way to coexist with the illness, and that That is the most important thing. And the whole thing about chronic illness, it is an ongoing process of acceptance, because just when you think you've got there, something else happens and it throws you off. You get a flare. You know, you were going along really well, and then suddenly the medication you're taking stops working, or all of these different things happen, right? And you're just thrown for a loop. It's that constant process. Like I was talking about that on my page this morning, about the fact that with my type 1 diabetes, I just felt like I'd got to this little routine where I had my insulin levels dialed in, I had my meals dialed in, I was relatively stable. And then for the past 5 years, with no change whatsoever, my blood glucose levels have been going up rapidly through the day. And I was like, what? Oh my God, why? Like, can't I just get a break? Like, I don't want to take more insulin. I don't want to take more shots. Like, why is this happening? And so I cried, and I spoke to a friend about it and expressed my frustration, went for a nice big long walk, and just thought, you know what, Carrie, if you got to take more insulin, that's what you got to do. That's just what you got to do. Take more insulin for whatever reason. Your body needs it, right? And it's just going through that ongoing process all the time of acceptance. So acceptance is not giving up. In fact, acceptance is empowering, because when you can accept something, then you can take responsibility for it. Because we all get stuck in the why, you know, why did this happen to me? Why, what did I do? Did I do something in the past, right? The why isn't important. You're never going to know. Like, there is theories about why autoimmune diseases develop, but we're never really going to know, right? It just seems to go along until something triggers it in the body and the immune system goes crazy, and that's what happens, right? But once you've got it, it's 100% your responsibility, and you are the only person who has ultimately got your best interests at heart. That's why you have to be that advocate, right? That's why you have to believe yourself and take it seriously.
One thing you said really resonated with me when you were talking about people saying, I'm not going to be my disease. I'm not Hashimoto's. I'm not this. I can't, you know, I'm just going to forget it or not look at it. And you understand why people do that, right? Because they get so focused. Myself, I have done this, where you put so much focus on that you finally get to a point where you're like, okay, I can't do that anymore. So now I'm not that. And it makes sense because it takes over your life. But if you can, as you said, just accept it, incorporate it, don't make it this huge focus. It isn't that you're Hashimoto's, it's that it's one of the things it's part of you. It's just one of the things. Type 2, type 1 diabetes, it's just something I do. I take insulin. You just accept it and incorporate what you need to do and kind of move on. You just don't have to focus on it so much. And I really appreciate that you said that.
And that acceptance doesn't mean skipping over the part where you cry the tears and you grieve.
Yeah.
You know,
it's a huge loss.
Yeah, it is. It is. And that doesn't mean life is over and we're ruined and there's nothing left to be happy about. It's just, you know, when we can remove ourselves from ourselves a little bit and think about all the other people out there on the planet who are faced with similar challenges or challenges that are even greater. It's like, you wouldn't think of someone else that way, that they're just diminished to, you know, to nothing because they have this diagnosis.
It's kind of a rebirth, you know, like you were a therapist doing this and now you're a therapist doing this, and it's opening up opportunities and things that you never would have had before. So it is kind of a death in one way, but a rebirth in another way, you know?
Oh, absolutely. I referred to myself as Kerry 2.0 when I got Hashimoto's, just to acknowledge that fact that this was a new life. And remembering at that time 6 years ago, I did not know what was going to be possible. Like, I didn't know if I was going to make it through. And my worst case scenario would be that I would have to put all of our stuff in storage, you know, get out of the lease on the place we're in. My youngest son would have to go and live with his father. My eldest son would have to move out. And I would have to go and live with my elderly father and try and apply for disability. Because when the doctor said, accept your new normal, my normal then was disabled physically and cognitively. And that was the scariest part, because I've always been a very independent, intelligent woman, and my brain has been, you know, key to getting me through those situations with that determination. And I've faced some pretty big challenges, but chronic illness has been the biggest challenge that I faced. And so we're heading out into this great unknown, no map, no guide, no compass. It's not like you leave the doctor's office and somebody takes you by the hand and says, here you go. This is what you do. This is how you eat. This is what you take. Here's all these wonderful doctors waiting to help you. You know, here it is step by step. Here's someone to help you emotionally. Like, it is not
Wouldn't that be nice?
even acknowledged. Wouldn't it, right? And a lot of people have actually said to me, you know what, Kerry, as awful as it sounds, I would rather have cancer, because at least people would have some compassion and understanding of what I'm going through. When
isn't that
it's
powerful?
not, it is not recognized. And that is the biggest thing, that we are dismissed, we are gaslighted, our illnesses are trivialized, they're not understood. People get impatient, people get sick of us being sick. And because in most cases we look completely normal, like it's the whole invisible illness. But the whole thing is, it all spreads from us, right? Because we teach people how to treat us by what we're willing to tolerate and accept. So I take my illnesses very seriously, and I expect other people too, because if I don't respect them, they're not going to respect them. So things have to change when you get chronically ill. And I think that is another big stumbling block. People don't want their lives to change. They don't want to need to do anything differently. They want everything to go back to the way that it was before. And they don't want their family or their partner to experience any negativity or impacts from this. So they try and take it all on themselves and generally just end up burning out.
You're also big on celebrating your chronic illness anniversaries, which I thought was a very cool concept. You recently had what you called your 6-year Hashiversary. Why do you feel it's important to celebrate these milestones that most of us are inclined to just ignore?
It's celebrating the fact that it was such a huge impact on my life. And again, that's going against that whole premise of, you know, oh, chronic illness is nothing and it's trivial and you know, nobody takes it seriously. It changed my life, and I've worked really hard to get to where I am. Like, I literally changed everything about my life. I went from disabled to functioning and working again, putting in so much work, so much effort, and I think that's worth celebrating. So it's celebrating me, and it's celebrating how far I've come, and it's acknowledging all of the pain and the challenges that went along with that. And really, as Danna said before, it's a rebirth, right? And I will do the same with diabetes. I will celebrate my first diaversary when that comes, because again, it's this massive change in your life that makes everything different, that you've got to adapt to, and that I constantly just want to see how much better my life can get. That is my main thing. Like, I want my life to be as happy and satisfying as it possibly can be. And that is my job. Nobody can make me happy. Nobody out there is going to do that for me. That is my responsibility. So in every moment, I want to make it as pleasant and comfortable for me as I possibly can. So yeah, it's really just, it's celebrating me, and it's acknowledging, wow, you know, this has been a challenge. And it's also a fantastic way to look back and say, oh, wow, that improved, or that got better, or look, I can do that now that I couldn't do X amount of years ago. Like, it was only this year that I got back to reading books like I used to, which is devouring them and being able to sit for hours and read. Like, when I had Hashimoto's first 6 years ago, I could not read a thing. I would sit there with a book and I couldn't make sense of it, right? And researching was really hard. So all of my limited resources went into researching and then implementing. But now I'm back to, just sitting and just losing myself in a book, and that's part of the old me that's come back. And so it's a great opportunity for me to actually evaluate what's happened in this year and celebrate the things that have got better.
It's such a refreshing and empowered approach. I love that, and I'm a big fan. I think in our culture, we're a little bit starved for ritual and ceremony too. And I mean, those sound like big words, but it can be as simple as on this day 5 years ago or a year ago, this happened, and I'm going to sit with my journal for 10 minutes and reflect on what that has meant. Maybe there will be some tears, maybe there will be some healing tears of grief over the things I've lost. And maybe there will also be some eye-opening moments of realizing, wow, I've really made some positive strides, because I know Danna and I talk about that all the time. It's affected every aspect of our lives. The same goes for the people in our community, all our thyroid-30 players. I mean, it really, the thyroid gland affects every system in the body, and it touches every aspect of our lives. It totally changed my career, Danna's career. This isn't something we ever imagined ourselves doing as little girls, but it happened, and here we are. And to take that time and create that space to acknowledge and reflect on that, I think is really powerful. So thank you for sharing that perspective. Before we sign off, I did really want to ask you to talk about another thing I saw on your Instagram. You had this great graphic that showed the chronic illness cycle. And this makes me think so much of not just Danna and I, but especially our thyroid-30 players, where, this is a very empowered group of people who want to do the work and they are taking the reins of their health, and they want to embrace their healing journey and make those changes so that they can reduce the symptoms and feel better. But this cycle that you so perfectly illustrated talks about, how we feel really symptomatic. We're burnout. We're having a bunch of flares. So what do? We get motivated. We make diet and lifestyle changes. What happens? Those symptoms start to decline. We start to feel better. We relax a little bit and think, I'm better now. I can read, sit down and read for 3 hours. I'm going to go back to my old ways. And we fall off the wagon to start the cycle all over again with symptoms and a flare and burnout and all of that. Can you talk about that cycle a little bit, the chronic illness cycle, and how do we break that cycle?
Yeah, and it's so common, and I see it all the time. And it's almost like that old diet mentality, where you just say, oh, I want to lose weight, so I'm going to put myself on a strict diet. But you go along and you lose what you want to lose, and then, oh, I'll just have that bit of cake. Oh, I'll just do this, and you end up gaining the weight back plus more, right? So what happens is that the first step of this is they're looking for a temporary change, right? So you're not really taking acceptance of the fact that living the life you are living before led to where you are. So it is not going to get you better. Something has to change, right? Because the way you've been living, the way you've been eating, your relationships, your stress levels, all of that sort of stuff have led you to where you are. So you're feeling reasonable. You don't want to let other people down. You still want to feel worthwhile. You want to be productive. So you push and you push and you push, and then you get symptomatic. You get stressed. You get flares. It starts getting scary. You think, oh my God, I've got to do something. And as you're talking about, Ginny, you go, yeah, I'm going to change my diet, going to do this thing. And you do it and you start feeling better. And the minute you start feeling better, you got some more energy. You want to do all the things. So you go and do all the things. you start feeling worse. You think, but I still want to keep doing all the things because I've been able to do all the things. And so you push through, end up burning out, back into that cycle again. So the way to get out of the cycle, the first thing that's got to happen is here, right, in the mind. You've got to accept chronic illness as a fact in your life. You've got to decide what you are personally willing to change, because change is hard and change involves sacrifice. But if you can look at it, is that I'm giving something up to get something back. And if you're really clear about what it is that you want to get back, that's going to make it easier. There's all of these little mind shift things, but it's getting into that mindset. Like if people do your thyroid refresh and go, okay, that was really good. What you guys want, you want them to incorporate that into their daily life so it doesn't become 30 days and then I go back to how I was, right? You want them to take all the skills and tools and strategies you've taught them and continue on with that to get better and better and better and more empowered. And that is unfortunately what most people do. They want a fix. They want a quick fix, whether it's they see a doctor, whether it's they do a course, whether they join a group for a specific purpose. They're wanting something that's going to give them a result, but not really change. Not really change those things at the foundation.
And that's why we, before Thyroid 30, our seasons even begin, we're like, baby steps are the name of the game. And this isn't about turning your life upside down. This is a marathon, not a sprint. It's about the long haul. And we also, most of our players come back season after season to play and to make these incremental steps. And then we play once per season or 4 times per year for 30 days. So we have, a couple months in between. And that's where we really try and encourage people, take that small step you made and try and make that your new normal. And then we'll come back next season and we'll do another small step. It's not, there's no promises that 30 days and you're totally fixed and you just go on your merry way and your whole life is different and you're going to stick with that, because we've learned from our, we have a psychologist on our advisory board, or a psychotherapist, excuse me, who's, really done a great job advising us. Massive changes overnight don't stick. They overwhelm the body, they overwhelm the nervous system. And it's really about adopting that long distance mindset, the lifelong commitment to optimizing our health and taking the best care of ourselves that we possibly can.
And the biggest trap that comes into that is people say things like, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to do that again. I'm never going to be able to eat that again. And the way that our minds work, right, our subconscious mind believes that. And it takes that on board and it thinks, oh my God, I am never going to be able to do that again. And it sends you into that grief. And then it spins you into resistance, right? And denial, right? And being deprived. Nobody likes to be deprived and nobody likes to be told what to do. So it sets off that defiance. And then what happens? We end up in self-sabotage. So people say things like, I know what I should be doing, but I can't do it. I can't do it. It feels too hard, right? So it's not about saying, oh, I have to eat this way for the rest of my life, or I've got to do this for the rest of my life. That's too much. You don't have to do it for the rest of your life. You just have to do it today, right? That's all you have to do is do it today. So I don't say never because I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I just do today because today is tough enough sometimes to deal with. But it's like I said, that's why in my therapy is very, very different to traditional therapy. I don't do just talk-based stuff because for me, talking about the issue and waiting for someone to get insight and then hopefully they will act on that insight is so passive. You can spend years talking about the issue without actually changing anything. And that's why most of my stuff is skills-based. Like, you've got to start to take these things and take the skills. So from day one, you're already starting to put those things into practice, and you can see how much they're going to change your life. Because when it comes to chronic illness, how you think about yourself, how you see yourself, how you perceive your worth and value, that is the most important thing, because that is going to define every relationship that you have with other people, every interaction you have with the medical community, because you're coming from that place of saying, hey, I am still a valuable, worthwhile, deserving, worthy person who deserves your respect and deserves to be heard and deserves to be believed. And that gives you that confidence then to go out and do all that necessary advocacy that is so important that we've got to do.
It sounds amazing. I wish everyone could have someone like you on their team. Before we sign off, I wondered, do you have any final takeaways for the listeners today?
I think, just to reiterate what I said, that you just believe in yourself, right? You're not exaggerating. You're not making it up. Don't compare yourself to other people, because I see that happen so often. You look at maybe someone you know online, or and just say, oh, wow, they've got what I've got, and they seem to be out there doing all of these things, and their illness doesn't seem to impact on their life like it does with me. There must be something wrong with me. Like, when we compare, we're going to end up despairing, right? Because it's either you want to find someone who's worse than you so you can feel better, or you see somebody who seems to be better than you, but you feel worse then by comparison. And the whole thing, as you said, Ginny, is we're all different, all right? We are all different. How the disease expresses itself in us is different. Our medical history is different. Our physiology is different. Our stress levels, our relationships, our support systems are all different, because chronic illness isn't just a medical, biological issue. It is a whole life issue, and you have to address every area of your life. And if you're not dealing with the emotional issues, a constantly stressed body can't heal, right? It cannot heal. So all of those interventions, all of those expensive supplements, you may as well go and throw them out in the street. You've got to get your mindset right. You've got to find acceptance. You've got to deal with your grief. You've got to get out of your denial, right? Out of that chronic illness cycle that we just talked about, and say, okay, what do I want my life to be? What can I do to help myself? And that's the thing that's going to get you there.
So beautiful. Yes. So well put. Thank you.
Don't compare your chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 20. And
exactly.
Don't underestimate the power of your own healing journey. Thank you so much for sharing with us today, Carrie. It's been an amazing conversation. For our listeners, you can find Kerry Jeffery at emotionalautoimmunity.com. And Carrie, you've got a free ebook for anyone who signs up for your mailing list. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, so it's called Moving Through the Grief of Chronic Illness, and it's basically a new grief model, because the only grief model that I could find was the one that was first developed by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and that was actually for people coming to terms and acceptance with their eventual death from terminal illness. And as I said before, we in the chronic illness community, we're in this whole grey area, right? And it's a constant process. So I've basically gone through every emotional phase that you can experience, from pre-diagnosis to acceptance, and then innovating and experimenting and moving on. So it's not a linear process, but it just makes so much more sense, because you can find out exactly what you can experience. You know it's normal, and it's also a really good resource to give your partner to read. It's a fairly short read, and it gives them an idea of the emotional impact, because that's what they're lacking, right? The internal experience that we're going through. So it's really good to give your partner or friends and family to read as well, and they can understand exactly what you're dealing with.
What a great idea. Well, for our listeners, you can grab that at emotionalautoimmunity.com. thank you all so much for joining us for another episode of Thyroid Refresh TV, where we give you the inspiration and information you need to live thyroid healthy. You can receive a free Thyroid Thrivers grocery guide by visiting us at thyroidrefresh.com. And to learn more about our new crash course, the Thyroid 30 Tune-Up, visit us at thyroidrefresh.com/tune-up. You do have the power to heal, and we have the tools.
And if you've enjoyed this podcast as much as we have, what an amazing journey this has been. Thank you for all your tips and tricks. Please leave us a review on iTunes. It would make our day. We so appreciate your listenership and your support. We're Danna and Ginny, wishing you the very best of health. See you guys next time. Thank you.
See you next time.
Bye.